All right. Hello, everyone. You're listening to You Got It with Warrior Woman 91. All right, gang, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed last week's episodes talking about Star Trek, which I really enjoyed. As you know, if you listened to the entire episode, I fell apart laughing by the end. So this week, I have finally brought back my very first guest on this show, none other than Donovan Fowler, who will no doubt bring as much humor to this show as he can possibly muster so that he can compete with the last one, which was hilarious. So Donovan, thank you so much for coming on. No pressure. All right, so this episode is the first part of a series I'm doing called The Top 10 Things You Need to Do Before You Die, which sounds morbid, but it's really just to talk about the things that you need to do during your lifetime that will, like, complete your arc, basically. And so this episode is going to talk about the top 10 movies that if you only saw these 10 movies in your lifetime, you would have seen everything you needed to see, or you would have had a well-rounded, I guess, movie watching experience. So these are the movies that you need to see during your life. And Donovan, I'm going to start with you. These don't necessarily have to be in any sort of order, like first to last or whatever. They just, if somebody was asking you, somebody like me texted you and said, Donovan, I need a list and I need it now of the top 10 movies, what would be the first movie that you would suggest that somebody needs to see?
So the first movie that I would suggest that somebody needs to see is Braveheart, because it was one of the most influential movies in my young, early life that I saw, I remember. And I would say the reason Braveheart is so important is because it's probably one of the more inspirational movies I've ever seen about freedom, with the theme of freedom. And I think that, that theme is obviously very relatable. I think there's something about it that it's sort of just like watching that story and kind of the way that it's put together. It really, it kind of brings everything to the table. It's romantic, it's, action-packed, it's big and epic, but at the same time, it's got sort of a deeper message about kind of doing with your life whatever you want, but really striving for kind of to be the best of yourself, or to kind of get things done that are worth doing. To quote William Wallace, every man dies, not every man really lives. And on top of that, I will say it was the one film that really brought back the epic battle genre. You wouldn't have, arguably, you wouldn't have Gladiator, you wouldn't even have Game of Thrones without Braveheart, because if you look at a lot of the Game of Thrones battles, they are almost ripped, verbatim from Braveheart, maybe with a little bit of nuance, but it was huge. It was huge for the time period, and it still holds up today. So that would be the first one that I would suggest.
I think that it's interesting that you picked Braveheart, because my pick was, of course, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and so I feel like those. I mean, I haven't seen Braveheart, but they're both kind of like.
Oh, you haven't seen Braveheart?
I know, I haven't seen it. So I needed your list so that I can know which movies I need to see from Donovan's list. So.
Yeah, now you have my list, so you have no excuse.
Exactly. So I need to watch.
So that's actually funny, because I've never seen Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, so I probably shouldn't be criticizing you, because I know that that's a classic, and I actually have it on my shelf at home. I never got around to seeing it. So now that, we're going to have a movie night and watch Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and Braveheart. Yes. And that's basically what's going down here. That.
Exactly.
It's going to be a long night.
It is.
It's going to be a long movie night.
Oh, boy. Okay. So the reason I picked Mr. Smith Goes to Washington is because I feel like it has a really good moral message. And, again, it is a classic. And the funny thing about Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, I didn't realize it's actually a ripoff of several movies prior made by the same director with a lot of the same actors. Yeah, he made several different movies that had a lot of the same themes, but they weren't nearly as good. And then he made Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and that was like the culmination. This is the story he was trying to tell all along, and he couldn't just come up with it the first time. He basically made the same movie 3 times and then got it right on the third try. But I love the messaging of just kind of not giving up even in the face of this. I could just be a complete failure by the end of whatever has happened, but at least I stood up for what I believed in, kind of a message.
So it's funny because then Braveheart and Mr. Smith seem to be thematically linked, even though, Mr. Smith isn't slaying people on the Senate floor with a giant broadsword. It seems like there's enough in common there between the two. It is funny what you say about, this is just a quick side note, about the fact that, Frank Capra made that movie several times before he ended up making Mr. Smith. It's a very common thing amongst like filmmakers like that, especially like auteurs, that you see that, and like Alfred Hitchcock was very much that way. Like you'll see like commonalities between his movies where you're basically like, okay, yeah, basically he's remaking the same movie over and over again, trying for mastery. And it's really interesting that way. And I mean, a lot of artists are like that. Like, there's painters who will paint, the same tree from all different sorts of angles, trying to capture what the best aspect of that tree is. And people wouldn't understand it, initially, but when you look at kind of how the art goes, it's really an interesting phenomenon. So it's interesting you say that.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't realize this for many years, because this movie has been, like, you can ask Jacob Airy, he'll make fun of me because he knows that this is my favorite movie. I talk about it constantly, and I didn't realize it until like even the last year when I started watching his Frank Capra's other movies, and I was like, this is the same movie, it's just not as good. And so, but they were all made prior to Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. So I thought that was really interesting. It really was work in progress that he finally was able to get the story right with that. So long movie night has been the moral of that story. So what would be your second movie, or it can even be trilogy of movies, because I have a lot of trilogies on my list here.
Oh, okay. So I did include a trilogy of movies. Now that you mentioned trilogy, I feel like I have to bump one to the front, because I'll bump this up. I just consider this trilogy to be one movie altogether, because it's pretty continuous, and I think you can do that. If I'm breaking the rules, I'm just going to break them. But I would say, well, here's what I'll say. Okay, the Lord of the Rings trilogy for me is one, the best trilogy of films that has ever been made. Two is a fantastic crossover from literature to film, and that's coming from a guy who didn't read the books. To me, the only reason I say that is because I took a deeper interest in Tolkien and everything that he was doing as far as his art because of these movies. Because I know people will always say the books are better, and I have no doubt the books are probably better than the movies. But these movies are, I always say to people, I think the Holy Spirit had something to do with the making of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, because it is so emotional and really just stands on its own. Like there's so much I could say about it, given that once again, like Braveheart, it rebirthed a genre and really brought it into a whole new realm of being, in that it basically made the fantasy genre what it is today. Like, once again, you wouldn't have Game of Thrones without Lord of the Rings. Yet Lord of the Rings has so much of a different kind of depth to it than Game of Thrones, in that it really does deal with specifically a very Catholic worldview of good and evil, but it's so subtle in that, because Tolkien didn't like allegory, it comes across as a super universal message, and I love it. I think it's I think the Lord of the Rings is one of the best stories ever told, and I think it's because it just the craft of it is so great. And that being said, I mean, like, the filmmaking of it is also fantastic. I mean, it was groundbreaking in that regards too. And if I were to pick one movie out of the Lord of the Rings trilogy to give somebody to watch, it if somebody were to say, well, which one? I only have 3 hours to live. Which one can I watch? I would say The Fellowship of the Ring, because I think The Fellowship is such a complete story on its own, and specifically Boromir's character in that movie. It just, I think his arc is just such a classical hero, but also very complex arc that I really respect.
So I feel like I'm basically doing this interview with myself, because number 2 was Lord of the Rings for me. And if I were to pick one of the 3 for people to watch, I would also pick The Fellowship of the Ring, but not for the same reasons necessarily, because I actually have read the books, and I think The Fellowship of the Ring is the most accurate to the books of the 3 movies, and so that's one of the reasons why I would suggest that one, because it's basically the retelling of the book, like almost word for word, only in a short, bite-sized, easy to swallow kind of a version.
And without Tom, by that you mean they cut out Tom Bombadil.
Exactly. That's the worst section of the whole book. Why?
If you want to make anything easy to swallow, just get rid of Tom Bombadil. That's the moral of that story.
Get rid of all of the either the Mary Sue or the Gary Sue characters. Just get rid of those characters, and that's how you make anything bite-sized or easy.
Gary Sue. Oh, that's funny. All right.
So we are definitely in agreement on Lord of the Rings. The interesting thing about Lord of the Rings is that even like the technology was so new at the time, because you look at Star Wars, like Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones came out around the same time, and their CGI just was not nearly at the same level as Lord of the Rings. So they really broke a lot of ground there. I mean, I think CGI fire was first used in The Fellowship of the Ring. Like that had never been used before.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think I remember on the special features of the extended edition, they talked about how they used crumpled up tissues as like a model for how the fire would billow and everything. Like when the Balrog was doing his thing. But that's a really good point. I mean, they made these movies in '99.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if I'm misremembering this, then shame on me. But I think they shot the first scene of Fellowship, basically, or not the first scene, but like the scene where Bilbo and Gandalf meet one day, and then the next day they shot the scene where Gandalf leaves, spoiler alert, at the end of Return of the King, like back to back.
Wow.
And I want to say that's true. Now that I'm saying that, it almost seems like that. I don't know why they would do that.
Well,
who knows? I mean, who knows what the shooting schedules were like or whatever. But ultimately, it's fascinating, and it's a fascinating. I mean, part of the reason I got into storytelling and filmmaking is because of, I mean, Braveheart and Lord of the Rings were the 2 movies that I was like, wow, this is really, really neat. And I knew that along with that, you could tell a deeper message. Like, it could be used for sort of more idealistic purposes as well, but that, it was a very, very neat art form.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the messaging in Lord of the Rings is one of the most profound, and that's one. It's kind of an overarching theme in my list of movies. Is like the movies have to entertain me, but I really like movies that have that kind of profound messaging, and one that I feel like is easily accessible from people even of different backgrounds, because it's not, even though J.R.R. Tolkien was Catholic, he wasn't like in your face, like I'm gonna crap on the Pure Flix movies, but he wasn't like hammering it into your face like, you will see this Christian movie. No, Lord of the Rings is a Christian movie, but nobody like thinks of it that way, because the messaging is so nice and subtle and just easily accessible to anybody, even people who aren't Christians, I feel like.
And he talked about how it was actually like a very it was a very Catholic work in hindsight on rewriting it. Like he when he first got it out, he had no intentions of inserting his faith into the story, and he was really going off of like old European epics like Beowulf and things of that nature, and probably I guess I'm trying to think what else would have been in there.
He also based a lot of the story off of his own war experiences.
Yeah, a lot of war experiences, a lot of mythology. Like I was listening to a very interesting video I found this recently, where the guy talked about how Tolkien took pagan Europe and basically built Middle Earth sort of out of what pagan Europe was. But then he, through his worldview and through his writing, kind of almost graduated it to the point of Christianity. And it's not evidently clear in the movies because they sort of stay away from some of the deeper mythology of Middle Earth, and they make it kind of a little bit more black and white. Doesn't really do it justice, but they definitely kind of keep it like, oh, okay, it's Sauron and it's like the forces of good, but you don't really realize that there's a whole creation story behind the world that is very, like, parallels, that of Judeo-Christian values, but it is also very kind of nuanced and different enough that you're not like, oh yeah, that's this.
Yeah, that it's not like in your face, you have to think this way kind of messaging, which I think is really
and I think that's
tactful.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that's what, like, all artists should really be striving for. It's like, you really want to you want to make it a little bit hard to figure out exactly what's influencing, your art, You want to make it special that way.
Yeah, I mean, it helps to draw people in a little bit better, especially, like I said, people who don't necessarily agree with that worldview are going to be more attracted to it if they don't feel like they're being beaten over the head with it. So, I'm doing another trilogy because I have to. This is so I'm going to go first on this one, I guess. My third set of movies that you have to see is obviously Star Wars. You have to see the original 3 Star Wars. Even if you don't see the prequels, even if you don't see the sequels, you have to see the original 3 Star Wars. Did that line up with you, Donovan?
Wait, are we including the Christmas special in this?
No, we are not including the Christmas special. I never have been able to finish that because it's so cringy.
Honorable mention for the Christmas special.
Okay. So what was your third set of movies? Or movie?
Well, I don't have another trilogy on my list. I was going to put A New Hope. And I do think that's going to be... Here's the thing. I am not a certified film scholar. I did go to film school, but at the same time, this list is not like verbatim for, what should be like the best movies of all time. This is more just personal preference.
Right.
But full disclosure. But I will say that A New Hope was on my list at one point because it had a huge effect on me. And I'd probably put Empire Strikes Back on there as well. And I like Return of the Jedi, but it's not what the others are. But anyways, I think A New Hope has such great heroic storytelling. I think that George Lucas really did get back to sort of he did get into what the hero's journey was, and that has influenced a lot of postmodern filmmaking since. So I'll give that an honorable mention. Actually, the next one on my list was do you want to go into Star Wars, or do you want me to name the next one on my list?
Yeah, just name the next one on your list.
So the next one on my list was The Searchers, which is a Western. It's a John Wayne Western. Well, it's a John Wayne, John Ford Western. So John Ford was the director who's famous for things like Stagecoach, The Searchers, The Quiet Man, all these great films. I mean, I can go on and on. I mean, he's won so many Academy Awards and everything. But he collaborated with John Wayne a lot. And this was done probably at the height of John Wayne's career after World War II. And it's a big epic Western that follows for lack of a better term, because you can't just label him this way, but a racist sort of war veteran who comes back from the war to his brother's ranch, and the ranch gets raided by Indians, and his niece gets taken. And it's all about him and his half-Indian nephew going on this quest to find the niece. And what you don't really know, or what's not really fully explicitly stated until later, is that he is actually like going on a journey to kill the niece because he feels like she's better off dead than having lived with Indians and becoming Indian.
Wow.
So it's so to say the least, it's a very complex story that has a great ending. Probably one of the like top 5 endings that I've ever seen in a film. And it's very complex in the sense that it's not 100% dark, despite what I just said. It's like there's humor in there. There's action. There's some heavy drama. And John Wayne gives one of the best performances, if not the best performance of his life in this film. And he really should have won the Academy Award for that performance. I think them giving him the one for True Grit was kind of a guilty, like, oh, okay, we haven't given you an Oscar yet, we should probably just give you this. But some people might disagree with me on that. But anyway, so The Searchers, the best Western you'll ever watch.
So I haven't seen that one, but I do have a question about John Wayne. So he's kind of this iconic actor, like Charlton Heston, just the guy, like one of the all-time most famous actors. Why do you think he resonated so much, not only with people who watched his movies while he was alive, but even to this day, he's just, recognized. Despite what progressives might want, he's still recognized as one of the most, iconic actors of all time. Why do you think that was?
Well, I think it's because he was iconic. He just was iconic, and it's because, to be iconic, I think you have to have a through line in your career or your life that communicates something, like almost like an ideology. And for John Wayne, I think it was American masculinity. And I think like playing soldiers and cowboys and, just like kind of all around like father figures, even in some roles that he did, he had this sort of no-nonsense personality that he exuded through his roles that I think appealed to a lot of Americans, especially in trying to get things done and really kind of being romantic about those periods in time, like World War II and the Wild West, where you had it kind of beckoned back to figures in history who were like that. And I think as far as like coming from the point of view of like an American male, I think a lot of American males, that was what they strived to be like. And even though he was playing fictional characters, I think he was echoing sort of an ideal of Americanism as far as masculinity goes.
I feel like there's not a lot of that in Hollywood anymore. Like there's not a lot of role models for men to really aspire to. Like if you just look at maybe you'll disagree with me on that, but there's not really there's nobody that I can think of that is actually like a John Wayne. When you think of the big...
No, I agree with you. I would say part of it I think is systemic, and I think part of it's cultural, in that I think for me, when I look at the Hollywood landscape today, I can think of like a couple of guys who I respect as far as like right now, as far as like new blood. I think Chris Pratt's pretty interesting. I think Jeremy Renner is relatively interesting, but you have, as far as stars, guys who are left over from the star system, you have Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise. Now, they're sort of almost brands, like Tom Cruise, he does all of his own stunts, and he delivers these big action-packed movies, and that's what people like about him. He has charisma. Brad Pitt is like a model who is an actor, basically. He's like a character actor model. That's what people like about him. Like, he's very good looking, and he does have kind of a stoic sense about him, but he doesn't really stand for anything, concrete. So I would totally agree with you. I think I think actually the kind of actor that you're talking about when we talk about John Wayne, Charlton Heston, and even Humphrey Bogart, and like Steve McQueen would sort of fall in there, but I think he was sort of the transition. I think it all came crashing down when Mel Gibson got arrested for the drunk driving thing. I think a lot of people looked at guys like Mel Gibson, and I'm trying to think of who else would fall into that category from that era. But Mel Gibson especially was sort of like, he was like the masculine role of the postmodern era. And when he sort of disgraced himself, you know, in that controversy, I think that signaled, I don't think it was the reason for the system to sort of collapse, but I think it signaled the end of it. And I think it's kind of interesting, those two things lining up. So yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate, but that is kind of where we're at.
Yeah, I mean, the only actor that I can think of that even comes close is maybe Robert Downey Jr. And the reason I even suggest him is I think that his kind of life story, first of all, it really does mirror the Iron Man story because, you know, he went to prison for drug abuse or whatever he went to prison for, and then he came back and he got back. He was famous prior to that. Then he lost everything. Then he comes back and he is like reformed, and he's like, you know, he gets this big movie deal, and, you know, he donates a lot of his money to charity and all the rest of it. And that's not to say that that's what makes a good person, but he does have a very nice redeeming life story. And so he is kind of somebody who maybe other guys who have gone through issues like that can look at Robert Downey Jr. and say, hey, this guy is big and famous, and he had the same problems that we did, and he cleaned up his act. But even still, like, it's not quite the same as the real icon that somebody like John Wayne was.
True. And I think what people just like always need to remember, and this is something I have to constantly remind myself of, is that all these people are human, and that, you know, it's like the old adage, never meet your heroes, because you're going to find out that they're human and that they have flaws. I mean, John Wayne was bald. He wore a toupee throughout most of his career, and he didn't care. I mean, he would joke about it all the time. I mean, in some respects, you could say that's like an admirable quality. He was very graceful about the fact that, you know, he didn't really care in his private life, but he knew what his public image was. But yeah, you don't meet your heroes, and if you do, you remember that they're human. And I think in the past, you know, this is something that's been talked about lately. It's like, you know, in the past there was a healthy amount of distance, I think, between Hollywood and the public, and now it's like with social media and everything, and even actors crossing over to TV, that distance has closed considerably. And you get a lot of overexposure. You get, you know, a lot of like gaffes and things happening, and it's just not the same. You know, I mean, it just doesn't play out the same. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know. But I think that's where we're at.
We'll find out. So we're moving on now to your fourth movie or trilogy or series of movies or whatever you've got on your list.
Okay. My fourth one is, so I have a movie on here called Michael Clayton. It's actually not super well known. It's a movie that George Clooney starred in, let's see, back in 2007. And it was basically overshadowed, I think, by There Will Be Blood and No Country for Old Men coming out. But it was an Oscar contender. It was directed by Tony Gilroy, who's actually a writer who had worked on big Hollywood stuff kind of all throughout his career in the 90s and early 2000s, and this was his first directing effort. Actually, he's the one who wrote the first Bourne trilogy, and he directed the sequel to that trilogy, The Bourne Legacy. And this was his first outing as director, and I find it's a very poignant little story about a lawyer who has not accomplished very much. Like, he's accomplished enough in his life that he's formed a niche in the law firm that he's at, and he's basically a fixer. Like, he fixes kind of things for big and powerful people to make bad things go away. And to quote his mentor, who's having like a mental breakdown in the beginning of the film, he basically says, you're a bag man, like you're a janitor. You clean up after other people. So it follows George Clooney's character having a midlife crisis as he watches his mentor, who he kind of looked to throughout his entire career, slowly lose his mind over this this big case that they have going on against a chemical company that's been like killing people as a byproduct of like pushing their product, for years and years. So anyways, it's all about him kind of coming back to a sense of morality and figuring out like what the right thing to do is, and when he actually has to kind of square up against what the right thing to do is, it's a huge crisis because it's basically like everything's going to change. So I think it's to me it's such a great story because I think we all find ourselves at times where we experience that, where we have to, at times of change, we have to realize, like, if I take this step or if I do the right thing, this might mean that I kind of get short into the stick, but I kind of have to do it anyways. And I just think the filmmaking that communicates that, like, is so good. The visual tone of the film is great. The performances are fantastic. I don't particularly like George Clooney outside of, like, Ocean's 11, but I really, really like him in this movie, and I think it's a great film.
Yeah, I think that theme really, I mean, it's definitely a real life experience. Like, it's happened to me where, you're fighting over what's the right thing to do. Should I do this? And it can take even months to figure out what the right course of action is. And then when you finally realize what the right thing to do is, you're like, oh, crap, it's that. And so, it's kind of, it's definitely a theme that rings true, I think, with real life. And that's probably why people tend to make movies about it, because it's something, it's very emotionally, it's emotionally draining to me to hear these stories sometimes, but people want to know that they're not the only ones that are experiencing this in their life, and that they're not the only ones having to, be shorted, as you say, because they had to make a decision that was the right decision, but they didn't want to have to make that decision.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes the best decision like that you make in your life might be the one that you think is ultimately going to screw you, but you made for the right reasons. And then, at the end of the film, it's ambiguous as to whether or not he actually is going to make it out okay, but you know that he did the right thing and that he's better off, even if he I don't want to say is destroyed by it, but even if it leads to harder times for him, it's like he's going to be better off than he would have if he had just gotten along to get along.
So my fourth movie on the list is the first Avengers movie, and I love
the first Avengers.
I feel like it's just kind of you have to watch this movie, even though it might not necessarily be the most, magnificent of stories per se, or like it's one of those ones where you just have to watch it because it is a classic, and it's just kind of a roller coaster ride of a movie, and you don't really have to think too hard necessarily, although it's just really fantastic, feel good movie. Bad guy gets his comeuppance with the good guys coming out in the end.
It to me was such a this may be controversial, but to me, Avengers 1 was like the high point of the Marvel universe, like cinematic universe.
Yeah.
As a viewer, anyways. And I say that because I think it just hadn't really been done before, this huge crossover. And Joss Whedon obviously has his issues that he's been, outed for over the last couple of years. But he did do it super well. And it was I just remember being massively entertained by it. Like, I was super happy with that film.
Yeah.
It was such a good culmination of what they had started, like, 4 years earlier. And, I mean, they carried it on. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love Avengers Infinity War. But ultimately, I find myself walking into a movie like that with so much more anticipation of what's coming. As opposed to Avengers, it was sort of like, let's see where this experiment takes us. And it ended up being like a great, like you said, just a great roller coaster ride of a film.
Yeah, I mean, was the thing that sold me really on watching any superhero movie, because that hadn't been the genre that I had been interested in really at all prior to seeing the Avengers. I didn't see the first Iron Man. I didn't see any of them. I didn't even see the Avengers until I want to say 2015 or 2016.
Dang, Kelly, you were behind the curve.
Yeah, I mean, it was not. I just thought, I was like, oh, superheroes is a guy thing, kind of a person, and then I was like, but I'm a little bit of a tomboy anyway, so I guess I'll watch it. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I love this movie. And actually, my favorite character in that movie was the Hulk. I don't feel like they've really done.
Yeah, it's the best Hulk movie.
Yeah, they've never done that character justice ever since. I don't feel like that was the best version I've ever seen of Bruce Banner / the Hulk, and I don't think I will ever see a version as good, because even in later iterations, even using the same actor, it just was not. They were never able to recreate that performance, unfortunately, and that was disappointing to me. But
I definitely agree with you on that. Now, here's a question.
Mm-hmm.
This is a point of controversy that has come between, our fellow acquaintance Jim Nichol and I, that Captain America's outfit in that film is horrible, he says. But here's the thing, it's not my favorite Captain America outfit, but I don't think it's that bad.
I mean, I understand both sides. I'm going to sound
a little campy.
Yeah. I'm going to sound really wishy-washy on this, but I really can see both sides of the argument on that.
Yeah.
Like, if they were trying to make Captain America into Iron Man, then yeah, it was a bad outfit, but he was supposed to be the throwback. And so I feel like it does fit in. One of the biggest complaints, actually, I think this is a complaint straight from Ben Shapiro himself, that Captain America is not really the kind of old school guy that he's supposed to be in these movies. He's more of just...
It's true. He's not like he's not... Doesn't he say that Captain America should basically be Mike Pence?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, he wouldn't be okay with a lot of the things that go on nowadays. He probably would be made very uncomfortable by a lot of these things.
For
and
sure.
The fact that he's just able to completely assimilate into the current modern society and culture and be able to function with the technology of today and all the rest of it is just, it's a little bit hard to believe. And it doesn't ruin the character for me, but I do. And so that's why I think that the fact that the costume is campy and the costume is a little over the top, I think that it's okay because it's kind of an homage to that character.
Right. Well, and I think it also, and obviously the arc of Captain America can kind of be debated on its own thing, but like it does kind of give contrast to how the outfit evolves from there.
Yeah.
Like, in Winter Soldier, it's clearly like dark and tactical. And even before then, in like Avengers 2, it's like getting to kind of a place of being that like a little bit more. So it's like his outfit does evolve over time to kind of show the journey that he's going on. Mm-hmm. So to me, it's like it's a good starting point that would be like bright and colorful, and I didn't have a huge problem with it. It's not my favorite outfit, but I remember thinking, it's like it looks clean and sleek, and whatever, who cares?
We'll have to make Jim listen to this episode, or at least this segment of this episode, so that he can hear what the real opinion that he's supposed to have is. So. Yes. I think we're on number 5. So we've talked about my number 4 and your number 4. So we're on your number 5 for the top 10 movies. So what is your number 5?
So my number 5 is Raiders of the Lost Ark. Mm-hmm. And I put that on there because it's easy to take Raiders for granted because it's become such a cultural kind of like staple of entertainment from the last 40 years, but to me I think Raiders of the Lost Ark is like the epitome of cinematic entertainment to me. Mm-hmm. And it's probably part of that is because I'm a guy and I love story of like the melding of sort of the realism of the adventure with the spirituality of the actual arc itself is really interesting to me. Mm-hmm. I don't think a lot of films have been able to do that since, being able to like have this mystical spiritual force and still make it feel like it's very much grounded in reality, and that arc could actually be sitting in like a warehouse somewhere. I think it's the best of the Indiana Jones movies, which I think most people would agree with me on. I do like The Last Crusade a lot, but I think Raiders is just so good in its simplicity. Just the way it's shot, the way that, Harrison Ford, I mean, I like Tom Selleck, but I'm just so glad that Harrison Ford got that role. The one thing about Indiana Jones and Harrison Ford's portrayal of him that I always liked was that he kind of had this everyman quality that was like, he wasn't James Bond, He was sort of he was a professor who moonlighted as an archaeologist, or maybe vice versa. It's like you could look at him as an archaeologist who moonlighted as a professor. But he kind of had this everyman quality about him that was like, when I see him get into fights with Nazis, it's sort of like, oh yeah, that's how my dad would fight a guy. It's not like this like crazy kung fu or anything. It's just this like sort of scrappy, like what does he say? I think it's in Raiders where he says, I don't know, I'm making this up as I go, Mm-hmm. And it's just that kind of energy I just love from that film, and I think it's like I said, I think it's the epitome of entertainment.
I actually figured that one would be on your list. I have to confess, though, there's a lot of these that you're listing off that I just haven't seen, and I feel like I'm just kind of a failure of a person for having not seen some of these movies.
Wait, have you not seen Raiders?
I've not seen any of the Indiana Jones movies.
Oh no, Kelly! Oh my gosh! What have you been doing with your life?
This is gonna be the most.
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No, you know what? Okay, here's the thing. We are going to have a Raiders movie night at my place when you come down for your vacation.
Oh my
That's
gosh.
happening because you have to see Raiders, and like I said, like anybody can like Raiders, so it'll please the whole crowd.
I feel like we are going to have the longest movie night of all time at this point, because we've discovered all these movies that I haven't seen that are classics that I just absolutely have to see. So it's going to get...
It's going to kill us, but we'll get it done.
We will get it done. All right, so...
It'll really be a movies before you die movie night. Like,
yes.
Like we will be dead by the end of it.
Yes, we'll all just be laying on your floor in your house, just like, all right, we did it. We completed our duties in life, and we've seen all the movies that we have to see. So what else is there? There's nothing left to do. So
we lived so many lives
through the TV screen.
Yes.
So my number 5 is actually a sad one. It's Life is Beautiful, or La Vita e Bella. It's foreign movie. I don't know if you've seen that one, but
I haven't seen that one. I've always stayed away from it because I don't like movies about the Holocaust. No, I just recently this year got around to watching Schindler's List. I forced myself. I was like, you should watch Schindler's List. Mm-hmm. But I always stayed away from Life is Beautiful because, one, people told me how good it was, and I was like, it can't be that good. And two, it deals with the Holocaust. And I know it's supposed to be like sort of happy, and I'm like, how on earth can you make the Holocaust happy? Yeah.
Well, it was basically the guy who made it. He was a comedian, and he pitched it to whoever he was pitching it to as a comedy about the Holocaust. And everybody gasps at the table, and they're like, what are you doing, you horrible person? And he's all, wait a minute before you throw me out. And then he explains it. And basically, the first half of the movie is just like a rom-com. It's just this silly, like, boy meets girl, all that whole thing. So it's really, the first half of the movie is really, really funny and just kind of stupid. And then they get married and have a kid, and they find, surprise, the husband is actually an Italian Jew, and he and his son both get taken to the camps. And so the whole premise of the second half of the movie is he's got a 6-year-old boy in one of the concentration camps, the actual concentration camps, not the nonsense term that they've made up for nowadays, but
Not AOC's version.
Exactly. But this entire time he's trying to keep his son alive, and in order to do that, he's got to keep his son from like freaking out. So he makes the entire camp a game. He tells his kid, this is a game, and we get points for doing the different things and for not crying and for having little to eat. We get extra points, and at the end of the game, whoever has the most points wins a tank. And it just gives me chills at the end. I'm not going to tell you how it ends because it's really, really sad, and I literally cannot watch this movie without crying anymore because I'm just a complete sap. But it's pretty devastating at the end. But I mean, it won an Oscar, so like it is a fantastic movie, and so you need to see that movie.
Yeah, I think I'll have to check this movie out at some point, but I definitely called that the ending would be super tragic. I was like, there's no, like, I looked at the cover and I read the title and I was like, oh, it's about the Holocaust. There's no way this is ending well. So here's the thing. Here's what I tell people. When I tell them that I've never seen The Pianist, or I hadn't seen Schindler's List, and I hadn't seen a lot of movies about, like, the Holocaust, or even, like, Amistad, like, about slavery and stuff, it's like, I'm not, like, I like to come home and I like to put on a movie that's generally, like, somewhat entertaining or something like that, and I feel like there's just no day where you're going to come home and you're just going to crack open a beer and be like, well, I guess I'm going to watch Schindler's List because I want to be, anyways, I'll stop it there, but needless to say, I need to on the advice of Dr. Jordan Peterson, take a step into the darkness every once in a while to see how things.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I actually saw it probably when I was like 12 or 15 or something, and I didn't get that emotional over it because maybe it just didn't really resonate with me when I was younger. And now, like, as I get older, and I don't know if it's like the maternal side of my brain, like, clicking on or something, but it's just like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna die. I can't watch it. I literally cannot watch that movie anymore.
Oh yeah,
it's too much. Anyway, so
I totally get that.
Number 6. What's number 6 on your list?
Number 6 on my list is Man for All Seasons, which is a movie written by Robert Bolt, and I'm blanking on the director. I want to say his name is Fred Zinnemann or something, but I don't know if that's correct. But it's got Paul Scofield, who is a fantastic actor playing St. Thomas More, and it's all about the kind of the rise to prominence of St. Thomas More becoming Chancellor of England and becoming friends with Henry VIII, and then his downfall that revolves around his I guess blessing or giving his approval of the marriage of King Henry VIII to Anne Boleyn. So to me, this movie is one. It's full of fantastic performances. Like I a lot of times, I was actually talking to my little brother about this movie the other day, and I was comparing it to Beckett, which is another movie about an English saint who was martyred, and it's similar in some respects. But I was just saying, like, this movie is like a movie. I mean, like, it's not like a stage play, which Man for All Seasons has been done as a stage play, but it's very cinematic, but the characters just have this liveliness to them that it's just so enticing. Even King Henry VIII, one of the things that I find most fascinating about the film is that he's really the villain of the movie, but at the end of the day, you want to be his friend, like at the beginning and throughout most of the movie, because he's so charismatic, and that's how King Henry VIII was. It's like he was a very charismatic and lively fellow, but obviously he had some bad tendencies that led to many people getting beheaded, which can't be overlooked. But thematically, I still just find that I look to this movie a lot when I talk about politics with people these days, because one of the things that St. Thomas More was very good at was that he was good at not incriminating himself through free speech. Like, he knew that he had the right to speak. He knew he had the right to say what he wanted to say, but he wasn't he wasn't going to be a fool about it. You know, he was going to try to play the game as long as he could before they finally, you know, got him. And he did, and it's just a fascinating kind of portrayal of a martyr who's trying to be faithful to God and put full faith in God, but at the same time understand that God gives human beings reason to sort of do what they need to do here on earth before you're finally, you know, called up to meet the Creator. So I think the performances are fantastic, and I think it's a fascinating little piece of history and very relevant to today's political climate, I would say.
I think it's really interesting just because contrasting it with my number 6, which is Psycho from 1960. Like, it's just a very interesting, I don't know, compare and contrast. Kelly's brain is going over here, and Donovan's way over here.
Well, don't get me wrong. I didn't add any Hitchcock to this list. I guess you're gonna have to be the one with Hitchcock. I can't believe, although I don't have any Nolan on here or anything. There are directors who I enjoy who aren't on this list. So I'm glad that you put Psycho on there.
Yeah, I feel like actually Psycho was my sister's suggestion last night because I read her my list and she's all, "Why is Psycho not on there?" And I was like, I don't know. So I dropped some. I forget what I dropped from this list, but I put Psycho in there because, I mean, I've seen it enough times that it's not really scary anymore. But the first time I saw it, Holy cow, that last scene is the one that scared me. Like, I wasn't scared by the shower scene did not scare me because, you know, it's old. And then the scene where the mother jumps out from the side room, it's not that scene is scary, it's just that it's startling because of the camera angle. And that's one of the things that I think is fantastic about that movie, because the weird angles of the camera are what makes it scary. It's not because the scenes themselves.
Wait, are you talking about the part where she stabs the guy who comes in the house?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that I'd say is the scariest part of that movie for me, and it's just because you see it all. I mean, you see her just move, or I guess, you know, him move, and it's just so creepy.
Yeah, again, it's the camera angle because you're coming down from the ceiling looking down, and you know that she is there in the other room, but it's just like you didn't expect her to come like right then. And so and
it's just so sudden. It's
and the incorporation of the music in that movie is just that movie would not be the same without that score is just it's incredible.
Well, and the revolutionary aspect of, you know, like killing off the, you know, quote unquote main character in the first, you know, half of it, it's a huge game changer. Mm-hmm. I completely agree.
Yeah, but the part of the movie that scared me the most still was the end when, because I have to confess, and this is embarrassing now, but I thought that it was his mother the whole time because I had never seen this movie, I had never heard about it, and I thought that it was his mother the entire time. So when he comes in dressed in her clothes, I'm sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, this is what she looks like. Oh my gosh, what is happening? And so I didn't realize until the wig gets ripped off that it was the guy the whole time. And so I'm like completely, like I was shocked and freaked out by that whole revelation because so I really recommend, I mean, anybody listening to this show now has had it spoiled, but if you haven't seen the movie, and if you didn't listen to everything that happened
you've had like 50 years, so, you know.
Yeah.
Shame on you if you haven't seen it.
I mean, I just really loved that I was completely shocked by the entire thing, and I didn't know anything, and I actually only just recently saw that movie, which is why I'm still excited about it. So that was my number 6. So.
Good one.
Donovan's number 7.
All right, number 7, I'm going to go ahead and say Casablanca, because I think it's I think it's one of the best, if not the best, romance put on film, especially given the fact that it's like they were writing it as they went. To me, Rick from Casablanca is one of my favorite characters in film, and I think it's because he goes through such a redemptive arc of like selfishness to selflessness that is likable all the way through. It's not like he's a sap at the end of it, and it's not like he's too. It's not like he's a complete bastard in the beginning of it. You like him all the way through, and you want to be, Rick's friend, but you understand why he's doing what he's doing. And I think it's just, and on that line, I mean, it's also sympathetic to Ingrid Bergman's character and everything. But there's a lot I can talk about with Casablanca, but I've just recently actually started to like that movie because I had never really given it a lot of credit before. And watching it recently, I just love that story.
There's just so many of these movies that I haven't seen that I need to see.
Oh my gosh! Well, I'll give you a pass on that one because I really didn't watch much of it until just recently. Like I really always kind of threw it away. It's like, oh yeah, that's just a Hollywood classic, whatever.
My number 7 was The Wrath of Khan because I'm a huge Star Trek fan, and I feel like that was the pinnacle of the Star Trek franchise, and it was all downhill from there.
So I actually haven't seen Wrath of Khan.
Donovan!
I have seen the clip of what's his name? The Captain Kirk.
Yeah.
William Shatner screaming Khan into the abyss of the universe at the end. But I have not seen Wrath of Khan, and I should. I was always more of a Star Wars fan growing up, and I was very tribal, and I had a heavy sense of tribalism when it came to my movie franchises. I was like, I'm a Star Wars fan. I'm not going to cross over into Star Trek. And then when Lord of the Rings came out, I was like, yeah, I'm a Lord of the Rings fan. I'm not going to do Harry Potter. So yes, Star Trek and Harry Potter. One of these days, I'll get around to them.
Now, if you want an example of campy, that's Star Trek. Like, Star Trek is definitely just it's.
See, I enjoy that. I do enjoy some aspects of that. I will say, I was a huge fan of the reboot in 2009. I thought that was just like. Now, granted, here's the thing about the reboot. It's basically Star Wars as Star Trek.
Yeah.
But I was a huge fan of that on an entertainment level. But I think the originals, I definitely look forward one of these days to kind of getting into it and watching them. I should give my dad the Blu-ray or something because he was really into Star Trek when I was growing up. Yeah,
I mean, my dad was definitely the reason why I started watching Star Trek at 3 years old. So I'm kind of inundated with it. But, I mean, The Wrath of Khan, the reason why I like that one is because it's based on the original characters from the 60s show, and the 60s show really, even though they're like, oh, Star Trek is an ensemble cast, no, as I talk about in my previous episode, it's really just about those two characters, Kirk and Spock, and their relationship and the things that happen to them, and that's why The Wrath of Khan is like, okay, now we're putting them in the most extreme circumstances here. They reveal some information about Kirk that we didn't know before that is really interesting, and then he has to actually grapple with the consequences of actions that he took even before he became captain. And and yeah, I feel terrible recommending this, but you really have to watch like at least a handful of episodes from the original series to just kind of get the gist of it, and then watch the first and second movies, just because it'll mean a lot more to you when you kind of understand, oh, this is the relationship between these characters. This is why, one meant as much to the other and vice versa. And now we're putting them in this kind of final scenario, this no-win situation, if you will. So it's one of my favorite movies, for sure.
I have a lot of respect for that. I mean, given especially how much work I'm sure it was to cross over from the television series into, the film, especially given the film was from the 80s, right?
Yeah,
I think the television series was a decade earlier.
Yeah, the original series was 66 to 69, I think, and then the movie didn't come out until this movie didn't come out until 82, I think.
Yeah, so I think that's awesome. I mean, I should sit down and I should watch. I've seen a couple of episodes of Star Trek, or at least I've seen bits and parts of them, but I should watch. I'll have to ask you for a list of episodes to watch, and then I'll watch Wrath of Khan.
Yeah, that'll be a good segue into our next episode, which will talk about the top 10 TV shows. But that's another story for another day. So number 8, what's number 8 on your list?
Oh, I think I may have miscounted. Oh. All right, I'll throw one of these into honorable mentions. That's what I'll do. So number 8 for me is Beauty and the Beast, and that would be the 1990. Shoot, when was it?
1991.
I want to say 92.
I think it was 91.
91.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you might be right. The 1991 animated film, I think, is great. It's my favorite out of the Disney animations, and I think it's just because I find it just on an animation level and a storytelling level to be great. I mean, that opening prologue with the stained glass, telling the story with the stained glass.
Yep.
And John Rhys Davies' voiceover narration is just fantastic, and the score is fantastic. One of the things that I admire the most about Disney's, renaissance, and I think that really kind of culminates with things like The Beauty and the Beast and The Lion King, is that they really got into some dark topics and like death and even like sin and things like that that were very akin to how fairy tales were meant to be early on, but they adapted them to be entertaining enough that you didn't really fully kind of understand the gravity of what you were taking in as a child, as opposed to say Don Bluth stuff like Land Before Time and what was it, like Secret of Nim. I mean, like those movies, they're great. I mean, they're masterful in their own right, but they're very, very dark and they're very disturbing. And when you watch them as a child, you get that. Like you really are frightened by what you're seeing, and it's kind of sad at the end because it's like it just isn't the same. So I'm a big fan of Beauty and the Beast. I think it's the best of that genre. I feel like I had something else to say about it. I also enjoy the fact that, so I know that there was a lot of I feel like the themes of some of these films like Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast were in fact quite liberal at the time. Not necessarily they didn't come off that way, but you had a lot of guys working on these films who were dealing with their own issues regarding homosexuality and things like that. And it's fascinating to look into this because you see how they were able to sort of almost take what they were struggling with and transfer it to these stories, or at least draw from these stories what, some thematic relevance. But they didn't make it overt. It wasn't oh, that's obvious that Little Mermaid is about, could be about somebody wanting to be, I don't know, a trans issue or something like that. Or that, Beauty and the Beast could possibly have something that, deals with sin and all this stuff. I mean, it's just interesting to me that, compared to nowadays, it's you look at Frozen and you're like, oh, well, that's clearly an allegory for something. Because it's very, and it's not super universal that way. And it's almost like it doesn't come off the same way. So I have a greater respect for Beauty and the Beast because I feel like they were able to appeal to a mainstream audience and get that emotional core across, as opposed to now when it's just in your face. Yeah,
I mean, Beauty and the Beast. I'm laughing because that is my favorite Disney movie of all time. I have whatever the diamond edition of that movie. I have the little character of Belle still on my desk at my house. I mean, it's that. One of the things I love about that movie, and it's shockingly not on my list, but one of the things I love about that movie is that they got the same actors to do the singing as they did to do the voices, which was
That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that was being done a lot at the time. They would usually get like a professional singer to do the song and then somebody else to do the voice.
Right.
But they actually just hired opera singers and said, you're going to do the voices too, not just sing the songs. So I really love that. I think the score is fantastic. And I agree with you about that opening with the stained glass is just phenomenal and scary and dark. However, it's not the movie that I have as my animated movie on my list because I think that if somebody is wanting to get kind of a taste of classic, I don't know, animation or really what Disney, what a really well done Disney movie is, I think that it's really Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the very first one, because I feel like that one really was, to me, the most artistically minded and the least commercial because they put so much work into it. And my sister and I were talking last night, and it's just really like frame for frame is just a painting on each thing. I mean, it's such a well-made movie, and it was at a time when the movies were not geared toward children, so it's a very adult version of that story. Even though you might not think so, it was geared for both adults and children at the time. So I feel like that's the one that I would put. I mean, I think that the villain is the scariest villain in all of Disney history. I think that the animation is phenomenal.
Yeah, pretty intense.
That's the one that I would put for the my number 8 there. So
they haven't remade the Snow White story yet for live action, have they?
They made The Huntsman. The Huntsman movie.
Oh yeah, but that wasn't Disney, was it?
I can't remember. My sister actually recently watched it. She didn't. She wasn't overly impressed. But I feel like that one needs to be like if they want to do a live action movie, they should do that one for sure.
Yeah, but they'll probably screw it up.
Yeah. The only one.
It's no doubt that they'll really they'll butcher it.
Yeah, they'll probably make it so that Snow White is some like social justice warrior or something.
Yeah.
I think
it's that she's transracial.
Yes.
And she doesn't really want to be Snow White.
Yes, that's exactly. We can't call her Snow White because that would be not non-inclusive, and that's very problematic. And I don't even know why you're bringing this up. It's making me uncomfortable. I need a safe space right now. So, I was gonna go on a rabbit trail about that movie because I could talk about it forever, but just to kind of cap the time a little bit, what is your number 9 on your list?
My number 9. Oh wait, I didn't miscount. I just can't count. My number 9 is Master and Commander, and for the full title, Master and Commander: The Far Side of the World. And it's that movie because I think it's a great treatise on leadership, and I think it's a movie that just doesn't. I mean, it didn't do super well in theaters, and I can kind of see why. It's not. There basically isn't. There aren't any women in it. It's all about like guys in the 17th century on ships chasing each other around the globe and forming friendships and breaking those friendships and putting duty over honor and honor over duty and honor over friendship and all this stuff. And it's long and it's sort of slow, but not like terribly slow. Basically, it's long and there's a lot that happens in between the action, is what I'll say. And like I said, like as far as like it's a very like sort of masculine movie in the sense that there aren't any female characters in it. I mean, maybe like a woman shows up once, but that's about it. So I think personally, I've said to people about this movie that if I were going to a desert island and I needed to bring a movie with me, this would be the movie because I can watch it over and over again and I don't get tired of it. I don't know why that is. I think it's because there's so many chapters to the film that you can kind of almost, when you finish it, you feel like you can go back and it's like a fresh start almost. So I think Russell Crowe gives a I'm not going to say it's his best performance, but it's definitely one of his most charismatic performances in this film. Like, Jack Aubrey is just a great character. There's a lot of depth there. There's a lot of history there. He comes from a book character, so, like, there's a lot that's going on under the surface that you don't see. Actually, it's interesting because I feel like his relationship with, the guy who plays Jarvis, what's his name in Iron Man?
Paul Bettany.
He also plays Vision.
Paul Bettany, yeah.
His relationship with Paul Bettany is very like Captain Kirk Spock, but it's very So, anyways, I just think if you're looking for a swashbuckling film that isn't quite Pirates of the Caribbean, but historical and is about friendship and leadership, and it's kind of almost like watching Planet Earth, but with cannon fights. It's great. So I'd highly recommend Master and Commander.
So my number 9 is not a movie I like. I want to preface this with I don't like this movie.
Uh-oh.
But I do feel like it's a movie you have to watch, and it's another Frank Capra movie, and It's a Wonderful Life. Now, the reason why I don't like this movie because it is a little bit anti-capitalist. It's also just a little bit of kind of a woe is me story because the main character does kind of make some bad business decisions. However, I do feel like it's a classic movie, and it does have one message that is positive in it, is that there are things that are more important than making all the right business decisions or than making all the right life decisions necessarily. There's things of greater importance, like how you treat people, or how the non-tangible things in life that are just more important than the physical and tangible things. And so I feel like even though I don't particularly like the movie, I do think it has some messaging that just kind of needs to be recognized, and that's one of the reasons why it's one of the most famous Christmas movies ever.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm a big. I actually think It's a Wonderful Life might be my favorite Christmas movie. Mm-hmm. And as far as the anti-capitalist thing, I definitely get that, but I also feel like part of it is like for people who kind of make it about capitalism and socialism, like they're missing the point.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, at the end of the day, it was basically like the theme of the movie, like, he who has friends, like, doesn't need, like, a huge bank account. And it's something that people can't really relate to nowadays because community isn't what it used to be. And in the past, it's like if you found yourself going through a tough time, you'd have a community or, at least a family structure that would allow for, I'm not going to go into the history of economics, but it's basically like, it's a great film about like charity. Mm-hmm. But it is misinterpreted. So I really wrote it off for many years, but lately I've returned to it. And largely due to it's fun. I love the part where they fall into the swimming pool, the dance, that kind of thing. It's a fun film. Yeah,
it is almost set up a little bit like, just going back to Life is Beautiful, how the first half of that movie is the rom-com, the silly love story, and the first half of It's a Wonderful Life really is kind of that too. So I think it's funny how, in order to tell these really like serious and dark stories, people set it up with these silly, campy, fun, like, you don't have to think too hard, you just kind of laugh, scenarios.
Like, what I was talking about with The Searchers, I mean, it's like there used to be diversity in tone in these films. Like, there used to be jokes, there used to be, like, it wasn't all about making it dark and gritty or one way or the other. It's like there used to be a little bit more of a kind of a sliding scale when it came to, the drama and the comedy. So, yeah.
Because that really is more true to real life, because there can be these nonsensical moments in life where you're just laughing your head off, and then the next minute you find out your grandfather passed away. I mean, that's very, very extreme, but that is the way real life is, and that's kind of how It's a Wonderful Life is. One minute he's at the dance with this girl, the next minute he finds out his father just had a heart attack. And I think that people probably relate to that a lot.
the way that description played out in my mind was somebody's at a comedy club and they're laughing the hardest they've ever laughed at a joke, and then a waiter comes up and tells them that their grandfather died. And immediately they shift from laughing to crying real fast.
That'll be a scene in the movie that you and I put together later in life.
Yes, that'll be it. That'll be when the main character finds out that his grandfather's passed away.
Oh my gosh. All right, so this got really dark and morbid very quickly. But number 10, this is the last one. I'm very excited. What is your number 10?
Okay, so my number 10, and this isn't like my list got all shifted around, so I feel like so this isn't like the end all, of great movies, but
yeah.
It's one that always gets me, and it's Tale of Two Cities, which was made in 1935, and obviously is based on the book. And it has Ronald Colman as Sidney Carton, and he's really the main reason I watch this movie. He gives such a great performance as Sidney Carton, he's like my favorite literary character. So I just find it's all about the ending of this movie for me. The ending of this movie has the most poignant moment that I've ever seen on film. And it's tough because it's like the entire movie is not necessarily flawless. Like a lot of exposition. Obviously it's hard to adapt such a great literary work without having some things fall through the cracks, but you really just have to focus on his character, and it just culminates in such an amazing moment of love, and it's the sort of thing where you're almost like, if I were to, and it's in the book, but the way that they do it in the film is just like, you're like, if that were my final last couple minutes of life, that's all I'd ever want. And there's something, I'm not going to spoil it for people. They can go out and they can see the movie, but you kind of know how Tale of Two Cities ends, but ultimately it's that performance and that ending that just make it worth going back for me.
Yeah. It's funny because you and I have talked about this movie before, and ever since you brought it up, I've been trying to find it, and just kind of casually trying to find it.
I had to get it at Barnes and Noble one Christmas. I don't know if it's on streaming, honestly.
Yeah, I tried to get it from Netflix DVDs, which sounds really old fashioned, but it's like
sometimes you gotta resort to desperate measures.
It's one of the only movies they don't have. They have it saved as an option, but you can't actually check it out. And so I'm like, well, does this mean I'm actually gonna have to spend money to see this?
Sounds like a conspiracy.
It is a conspiracy to prevent me from seeing this movie. But I have read the book, and the book was just kind of, it was like a Return of the King level, emotional impact. And that ending, it really is what makes the entire story worth it. And kind of the emotional turmoil. I know you've read the book as well, so you know that the back and forth that Sidney Carton is going through in his head about what he's about to do or not do, or what, and just how the whole thing ends is just really, it's heart wrenching. So I definitely want to see that movie for sure. So
all right,
drum roll for Kelly's number 10 is The Dark Knight. So that just, the reason why I love that movie is not because I think Christian Bale is great as Batman. I think he's a mediocre Batman, and it's not because I think that the reason why that movie is so phenomenal is because of Heath Ledger's performance, and it's not the only reason, but it's the biggest part of the reason why people love that movie, because that performance was everything. It was the first time that I really saw a movie where you were actually rooting for the villain, because it's like, I mean, he's the guy that you're following and that you really care about. You don't necessarily care about the little angsty, emotional happenings of Bruce Wayne. He's just he's like this too perfect character that you just can't really touch. And I do feel like Batman is a little bit, I don't know.
He's a little bit too much of a martyr in that movie, honestly. I think I don't feel like I love Batman Begins, but my biggest problem with Dark Knight is Batman. And I'd agree with you that really why that movie is living its full life right now is because of Heath Ledger's performance, but also the writing and the directing. So it's like, because I was talking about this with somebody recently, and that Heath Ledger really, it would have been him chewing the scenery otherwise if they hadn't given him good, follow through with the writing. Otherwise he would have become Jared Leto, basically, and nobody wants that.
Yeah, I mean, there's also kind of some psycho elements in that movie, which is one of the reasons why I was kind of debating whether even to include this movie, because it's kind of a psycho-esque movie. But it's kind of what we were talking about earlier with how there were movies made and then there was the movie made after they had experimented a little bit. This movie was kind of like Psycho was the movie made, and it was great, but it was also an experiment, because then other people were able to look at that and say, well, what if I took some of the elements in that movie and put it in here? And so I just feel like the Joker, there's a lot of scenes that really harken back to that movie particularly, and, camera angles, the scene that, there's two scenes that scared me in that movie. The first scene that scared me was the scene where, the Why So Serious scene, when he's, telling the story, would you like to know how I killed my father? Or whatever he says. And I knew that end game for him is he's going to cut the guy's face. And not realizing, because I wasn't thinking, oh, it's PG-13, they're not actually going to show it. I was just thinking, oh my gosh, they're going to show the guy's face getting cut. And so I'm freaking out. And so I can never watch that movie again because and have that same level of fear, because that was my fear the entire time. I was like, oh my gosh, he's going to cut the guy's face to look like his. And then they didn't actually show it. And so I was like, oh. But, that scene, and then the scene that I thought was also fantastic was the scene where he's doing the hostage tape, and apparently much of that scene was just Heath Ledger ad-libbing and just basically doing his own hostage tape.
With the guy, with one of the sons of Batman?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, so that scene I thought was really well done.
That scene is very quotable, as it turns out, because I feel like any time anybody in the editing department is asking somebody to look at them, they always have to say, look at me. Very much, very, very channeling the Joker. It's like, if you don't look at this, people will die, starting tonight. Oh my God. That is a fantastic... absolutely fantastic performance on his part.
You're making me remember why I loved hanging out in the editing department. It was fantastic.
We'll have you back anytime you want.
All right. Well, so those are my top 10, and those are Donovan's top 10. So for the audience's sake, if you haven't seen any of these now 20 movies that you have to see, and there's so many that are just like the honorable mentions. I mean, I left out like The Wizard of Oz. You got to watch that movie. There's just I know.
The Wind,
there's
The Adventures of Robin Hood.
Yeah.
Shoot, totally forgot about that one.
There's just so many that we could have thrown in here, and it was really tough to kind of narrow them down. But I feel like we got a pretty solid list, and you guys can kind of tell where my my emotional resonance comes from and where Donovan's comes from. And I do laugh every time we come up with the same set of movies over and over again, but
it's true. We're clearly on the same wavelength. Well, we're gonna have to do a top 10 TV. Although my TV watching is not nearly as I guess I don't do nearly as much TV watching as movie watching, but I'm sure I can come up with my favorite TV shows.
Yeah, I mean, I want to do a top 10 TV show. I want to do a top 10 books. We'll see. I want to make sure that Donovan is the guest for this series, so this may not happen. I think we do, an episode with you every 5 months or so.
Well, we try. How about that?
That sounds good. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Donovan. Everybody who was listening, please like, subscribe, ring the darn bell, or spit in the spittoon, as my sister likes to say, for YouTube. And I will talk to you all on the next episode.